Hello, welcome to another episode of The Puzzle where Isaac and I tackle difficult business questions for 10 minutes plus minus another 10, but today we will really try to hit those sweet 10. Our goal here is, or our desire is to open up the topic and surface maybe even more difficult questions. We speak from personal experience, both as people that actually do the work, consult, academic background, the whole sweet package. So the question for today is how to manage requirements. And Isaac, maybe you can open up first. What requirements, in what context, before we even start discussing managing them?
What is even requirements? So what are requirements? People might have heard of the word. Maybe they already manage requirements, but they never call them requirements. Usually, if you are involved in project management, you have heard of them. Requirements is basically what a system that you're developing needs to fulfill so that you can know that it's doing its intended job, to put it very simple, very high level. Managing requirements means looking at requirements as something that evolves over time, that needs to be tended. In my view, and my experience has been like a garden. It is never static. If you end up with something that is very static, then there was not much uncertainty to begin with. Therefore, you probably don't have much to contend with in terms of innovation, serendipity, and so on. And managing requirements means managing them from the first inception of the idea, understanding what the system should do, analyzing it, breaking it down to, okay, so therefore these are the requirements, breaking them down to specification, design specification, then matching them with tests that you do so that you know, oh yes, we're meeting that, therefore we're meeting that, therefore we're cascading upwards, and therefore the system should do what is required to do. Easy to say, incredibly difficult to do in a good way. And I don't know where our viewers are. My experience is primarily Central Europe. I find that it's one of the hottest topics, especially because it can become a full-time job, managing requirements, and then you end up with bureaucracy and so on. And meanwhile, in the more dynamic world, I was about to say agile, and I caught myself there. The more dynamic world of startups, entrepreneurial endeavors, yes, you need to manage requirements, but you need to manage them a different way. The requirements management, let's say at a Volkswagen and at my startup and at a mid-size company or a small project.
So it's interesting what you raise, and I would even say that the level of difference is how it's talked about and how systemic it is. The moment you walk into organization, they actually start talking about requirements. You know you're in an organization that has a systemic approach, or at least bureaucratic approach.
Exactly.
When you go into startups, scale-ups, you will never hear the word requirements. Like it's just considered démodé, passé. People don't talk about it. That doesn't mean it's good or bad, but it is a difference. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily geographic. I think it's mostly related to industries. Like specific industries do have a history of like deliberately managing requirements, having that as a discipline. While in other industries, requirements are still managed, but they're not called requirements. They might be called, I don't know, design guidelines.
Yes.
Or design principles or something like that. But in fact, they're actually a set of requirements intermingled with some other things. But what I would be curious to hear, because you've been working almost your whole professional life with requirements, what would you say has been the biggest positive and negative change when it comes to managing requirements, looking back, since you started to today?
So, because I studied and worked in Switzerland and worked all with Germany and Austria, the biggest negative I've seen, and the thing that made me want to, pull my hair out, was requirements a la automotive, but not in the automotive industry. I agree with what you said. So there's a correlation there. Those geographies have a lot of automotive, aerospace, heavy machinery, medtech, and so on. Therefore, because of high cost of error, regulatory approvals aspects, yes, of course, you manage requirements in a very tight way, because if you don't, people die. But to take now, so the most negative experience I've had with requirements engineering and management is the idea of someone coming from an automotive supplier and taking that whole, I call it straitjacket, process straitjacket, with software, with processes, with checkpoints, with roles like requirements manager and Excel sheets or doors and Jira and whatever they use, and just putting it on top of an organization that was not in automotive, had a total different culture. That was a total disaster. And that was one of the projects that I managed to turn around. The best experience I've made with requirements is realizing that before you do anything on a piece of paper, just put people in a room and have them decide on what the hell it is that the system should achieve, and then start to break it down. It is more important in the early phases to collaboratively agree on what it is we're developing than to capture it with shall, should, will, and all the bureaucratic nonsense for most organizations that are very important when you write contracts between tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers in automotive or aerospace or whatever. So I would say those are the two ends of the spectrum. More collaborative, down to a startup size, is good. More process-oriented, more rigid, where it does not need to be rigid, is disastrous for speed and for people's involvement.
And it's I'm gonna make a small meta comment here. So what I'm hearing, and that resonates with me, is before you go any detail work like requirement work, figure out what's the purpose of the system, kind of what outcome does it serve. But it's interesting, something else you mentioned. I know it was just turn of phrase, but it's something I want to specifically call out for our corporate listeners, and that is this comparison with startups. So startups are usually mismanaged.
Yes.
They're not some sort of wunderkinds that know how to make unicorns. The reason they, for example, what you said, they're not always good at collaboration. But in a startup, you usually have the founder that has a very strong vision of what product has to serve, like what purpose it has. So that's why there's this bigger drive and bigger, let's say, confluence of requirement making and managing process. So there is this strong ownership. While in a larger organization, there will usually be bigger ownership. We have to figure out what's the purpose, how does it serve internal customers, external customers, etc.
It's a value proposition, in other words. In small organizations, in startups, the value proposition dominates and is being propelled ahead. Hopefully it's right also. It's like valid and so on, valuable, by the founder, the co-founder, whoever is in charge, because they have a stake in the matter, skin the game, and so on. In bigger organizations, because they profit from the fact that, anyway, the new product will ride on our sales network, on our brand, and so on. The value proposition of the product, not only does it not need to be so tight as at a startup, it can afford to be a bit sloppier, but also you have so many more people who also have zero skin in the game that they missed the plot somehow. Therefore, it's a very nice observation. I never thought about this. Basically, they're orthogonal in why it works when it works and why it doesn't work when it doesn't in corporate.
Just building on top of that, since you have experience both with the heavy processes for requirements management, and I guess you still use approach to some extent today. So I don't know if you ever did it, but I gotta ask you to do it now. Like, how would you describe light requirement management process? Like something that could fit on one page, or a process where you could collaboratively sit down with your team or group of people. Like, what would be the thing you would, try to do, watch for, steps, anything that comes to mind?
Super light requirements engineering, in my experience, is 2 or 3 elements. The first one is iterating on good enough value propositions that do not need to be perfect, but are way better than just good enough. People can agree on them, and they are somehow validated that they're not totally wrong. They're going in the right direction, so they're directionally correct. Second part is then do what is called, if you have a technical system, what I've seen working really well is what's called a system footprint, where you create a bit of a map of all the components of the system, of the technical system, not of the product system, including business model and so on. Think about, I don't know, the widget and the whatever else, technical systems, electronics, how they connect. And then look at how the functions of functional analysis or do QFD. QFD is fantastic to get this done, right? What function does every part of the system need to deploy, or how you link the requirements and the specifications. Super old school tools that nail things down. And the third part is, if you want to document, for heaven's sake, don't go and buy licenses of what the automotive or medtech uses. Just open a spreadsheet. You will already be better than 95%. Okay, all statistics are made up, right? Or 75% of statistics are made up, but this is also a fake statistic. You'll be better than the majority of organizations I've seen, of teams I've seen. You don't need to go too far to get great results with super cheap requirements engineering and management.
And this is where people can fall into a trap, because they start looking, start looking for a easy way forward. They start looking for templates, and it can sometimes also be a lack of confidence, kind of, okay, if I find a template from a respected institution, then I'm safe. Of course, we can use it. But in many cases, these are way too heavy processes, especially requirements management processes. I know there used to be like a whole requirement management body of knowledge, something. I don't know if it's still.
I have a book right there. It's called Automotive Spice Assessment and Contains Requirements. It's okay. Yeah. I'll check it out the window, but there's so many things, that so many rigid things around that, because people make a career out of it. You don't need to. So yes, it might sound self-serving. Yes, I know. But if you don't know how to do this, get someone who is reasonable and experienced, let them or ask them to help you. And you don't need much. I mean, if somebody tries to sell you on the idea that you need to have a requirements engineer full-time in your team, run, because they're looking to milk the cow for as long as you feel that you need them. Have someone show you the way, point you the right direction, and then goodbye. It is not super difficult to do it well enough to actually get a massive boost and massive benefit.
Well, Isaac, I want us to end on a mental image of milking a cow. Thank you for listening. We're going to bring more difficult questions next episode and many episodes after it. And if you have any question of your own, don't hesitate to send us an email, write on LinkedIn, anywhere. We love wrestling with difficult questions.
Engineers.
Until next time.
Goodbye.